All right, welcome everyone to our just before Thanksgiving event for the Center of Sustainability Reporting and Performance Management. If you don't know me, I'm Nancy Vandenbosch, so faculty member here at the school and one of the associate directors of the center, which we thank CPA Ontario for funding. I'm joined by two of my colleagues here, and I will ask them each to say hi, and then I'll introduce our guest. So I'll go first to Wenchen, since I can see you on video. You want to say hello to some of these students who I'm sure know you.
Yeah, I'm not sure they all know me, so hi.
And Adam Presley is here as well. Adam, do you want to unmute and just say hi to get us going? He's not going to unmute. All right, he is here. Uh, Wenshin is going to monitor chat. So for those of you who attended our event a couple of weeks ago, you know how this works. We would love to fire questions from our students to our guests today. So please type them in chat and we'll integrate those into our conversations. Um, we are also joined by our guest today. So let me welcome Wincy Sin, so one of our MAcc grads who is currently Director for FP&A Transformation at Manulife. And for the students who don't know what FP&A means, it is financial planning and analysis. It is a really important part of a CFO shop, whether it's a for-profit organization, not-for-profit, large companies, small companies, everything in between. So when you start hearing people talk about performance management out there in the real world, a lot of it, not all of it, happens in FP&A. And one of the things we're hoping you'll learn from Wincy today is what actually does this include? So, Wincy, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We like to start these events by, first of all, helping the students get to know you before we start talking about insurance and FP&A and transforming it. So let's start with a couple of quick questions. Where were you born and raised?
So I was born in Hong Kong, but I did move to Canada when I was about 4 years old, and I've been in the GTA essentially ever since. I guess obviously there was Waterloo in the between there, but otherwise, yeah, it's been Toronto.
Toronto. Well, let's talk a little bit about what maybe brought you all the way out here to Waterloo, and what you've been up to literally since you graduated. I think that would have been 10 years ago from the
Yeah.
MAcc program. So what brought you here and what got you to where you are now?
So at the time, I think this is many, many years ago now, obviously, but when I was looking into universities, I think Waterloo was the only school of accounting at the time.
Mhm.
Uh, so one of the few schools that was offering a major in accounting. Certainly, there were a lot of schools that were offering specializations that would go into accounting off after a business degree or an economics degree. But Waterloo stood out to me as the one that would be accounting focused. It was I would say, ambitious goal at the time, maybe a little bit less informed as it is now. But certainly it sounded like accounting was a clear-cut path for me to go forward. It was the goals were explicit, so I went for it. Didn't really look back, obviously. And yeah, from there, from graduation, I've been with Manulife. And actually, I was a co-op student with Manulife as well, which perhaps is a little bit unique in some of the career paths that you may have seen from other guests. I've been with Manulife since before graduation, and I am still there. So they are truly my only employer. Um, as companies go, I have had the opportunity to go to a variety of different teams. As a co-op student, I was in internal audit. After internal audit, I joined Manulife's CPA rotational program. So that did offer me the opportunity to rotate into more financial reporting type roles. There was a little bit of accounting operations, so making the journal entries happen at various levels of the company. There was expense management in there, which also put me onto more of a project focus at the time. Then I moved into FP&A right during the pandemic, which
Oh,
was
fun.
quite interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So it's been FP&A since 2020. When I first started out in FP&A, there was no transformation tag added to it. It was truly just corporate FP&A, financial planning and analysis. My specialization was in planning side of things, so we'll get into that. Now on the transformation side of things, I'm transforming what I used to do.
Cool. I do want to take an advantage of the fact that you did go through the CPA, I guess CA at the time, rotational
Hmm.
program, because as you pointed out, we tend to focus on the let's go work for professional services firms, audit
Hmm.
tax, get our theoretically pre-approved hours all in. That rotational program gave you approved hours. So I'd like you
That's
to
right.
talk just a little bit about your experience. Um, what was it like? What were the rotations like? What were some of the benefits and maybe some of the things that were more challenging?
Um, I would say let's start with the challenges first. The challenges, and I think that still stands for the rotational program environment now, is that the roles that are available in those programs are quite limited. Even though there's more and more companies exploring the opportunity to give students approved hours through kind of pre-designed programs and roles, it is still quite a limited offering. So it's challenging to get into, and it's never quite what students expect is what I seem to observe. For sure, for myself, it wasn't exactly what I expected either, because it can be quite limiting. When things are pre-approved, they usually have to follow a very specific set of experiences, so your duties are kind of preset for you. There isn't a lot of flexibility that one may look for in a career, like in a starting role. There wasn't really very much opportunity to be like, hey, that looks really cool. Could I go and work on that project? And it's like, oh, actually, I've got to work on my competencies first. So it was a little bit limiting that way, but it was very structured, which was very helpful. So moving on to the pros of it, it allowed me to see different parts of the company a little bit quicker, where traditionally, if I were to say graduate, apply to a variety of different companies, land kind of a entry level position as an analyst or as an accountant. I'm kind of working on something very specific. It may take me some time to find that opportunity to rotate or move into another role that's going to allow me to see the company from a different perspective. With the rotational program and a lot of these kind of pre-approved programs, there is a set timeline on when your experience needs to change so that you get all your competencies. And I think the advantage there is that you naturally kind of see a couple more perspectives of what the company is about, just naturally in getting your competencies. So that was the pro side to me.
Okay.
Adding on to that with Manulife, we've really tried to offer a variety of opportunities to the students that join our program, which means there's a small collection of roles that the students may be put into that we're trying really hard to tailor to a little bit of preference. So for example, there's a taxation role, there's multiple roles in audit, there's multiple roles in financial reporting, management accounting. So not all students get to go to all the different rotations, but at
Okay.
least there's a little bit of tailoring, hopefully, to people's interests.
Okay. And in terms of duration, was yours a 2-year program?
It was
3
actually a
years?
30 months, so it's
30
about
months.
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the usual timeline.
Okay. And 2 rotations in there or three? Because I've heard both.
Two rotations for me.
Okay.
I think two rotations, it gives us just enough time given the 3 year kind of timeline. Then it ends up being one full business cycle plus a little bit extra. So for sure, you're getting the full experience of the role
Okay.
before you move on.
Okay. And just for the students, last time I checked with CPA Ontario, there were almost 50 organizations, a lot of the large financial services firms, some of the public sector companies as well, the telecoms that run these kinds of programs. So keep those in mind if you're thinking about careers. Before I pause, I don't see any questions in chat, but I'll go to Wenchen. Am I missing any? Or Wenchen, do you have a question for Wincy before we get into some of the stuff on FP&A?
I don't see students' questions so far. Probably we just settle in. So, yeah, I'm fine with we going forward. So let's move on with some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, Before we let the students in, Wincy, you started to give us a sense for the potential scope of FP&A generally and
Hmm.
then at Manulife. But I want to back you up one step because you
Hmm.
also started throwing in terms like actuaries. So I
Yes.
need you to back up a step because I think for students to really understand your role, talk a little bit about, okay, so what's an insurance company do? Because most of us don't get to see that on a day-to-day basis. And all those actuaries that graduate, and I'm pointing at the math building now, that graduate from the north end of campus, how do you interact with them?
Yeah, we're in an interesting environment, and Waterloo is also an interesting space to be seeing this, both from the university perspective as well as in the community, actually. If you've been around the city, you would have noticed that there are a number of insurance or financial service companies that are based out of Waterloo. In fact, Waterloo, or KW, is Manulife's Canadian headquarters. So the building beside Conestoga Mall, that is our home base when it comes to Canada. Um, so when it comes to how do we interact with the actuaries and what it looks like in an insurance company, insurance involves a lot of modeling. We're trying to, well, for Manulife specifically, we're selling life insurance, there's group benefits, there's health and dental insurance. We're not in the business of property and casualty, so there's no
Okay.
house, no cars, that sort of thing. But there's a lot about life and health. So there's a lot of modeling that takes place about how long are we going to live. That's kind of the actuarial opening line. That's how I've been described on how this connects. But really, we need to somehow understand how our population is going to behave and when those life insurance claims are going to come in. Um, in class, we learn a lot about present value of like an investment, annuities, and those are just kind of happening as time progresses. There's a market there, there's some sort of assumption. When we throw in the aspect of insurance, then we're starting to think about, well, people, and we now need to understand a little bit more about, well, statistically, how does that look like? The actuaries will go and tap into their resources. Databases that have that kind of historical information. I guess casually we can think of it like StatCan is, or Statistics Canada would be one of those sources that we have access to that could be comparable in some ways. But all of that information models for us when those obligations on our insurance policies are going to come due. So there's like lots and lots of annuities or lots and lots of present valuing that's taking place across a portfolio of products, across a variety of different products in different geographies that all come together to make up what the insurance company has sold. All those things get modeled in. And then insurance companies actually have their own way of revenue recognition. A very fun topic. IFRS 17 is the latest standard that's come out related to recognizing revenues on insurance contracts. It's a lengthy one. It's a very challenging one. It goes into a lot of industrial jargon that's very unique to us. The newest idea around that is the concept of contractual service margin. So this idea of we need to provide the services um, that are kind of contracted before we can recognize the revenue. Very simple thing when we're talking about selling widgets or something like very single action or single event in class. When it comes to insurance, sometimes, say for life insurance, we're waiting for the person to die essentially
Yeah.
and make their claim back to us
Yeah.
before that service obligation goes away. And that could be years and years and years, depending on when that life insurance policy came into action. So with that, combining that with all of the actuarial modeling that gives us information about when, or guesstimating when those obligations are going to come in, we then have a lot of basically like unearned revenue is the kind of concept that we need to recognize and then essentially amortize into our earnings. So a lot of detail there. But yes, IFRS 17 has been the keyword in the last couple of years. It's a lot of calculation that takes place, and it's an interesting environment because it's almost like the actuaries are telling us what to account for, because we rely on the results of those models to indicate to us when we can actually recognize that revenue.
Cool. And I'm sure students are having flashbacks to, I think it's now called
Sorry.
AFM 291, although I don't think you got into that standard. If you're heading to MAcc, you may. Okay,
Mhm.
so insurance companies, and specifically for you guys, life and group benefits. Um, let's move into, okay, so the actuaries send you some data. We now have this entity that's called financial planning and analysis. So can you
Mhm.
share with the students sort of your view broadly what it is, and then your specific role in terms of FP&A and transformation?
Yeah, FP&A, so financial planning and analysis, I think classically we think of that as the CFO's office. A lot of the times we're looking at, especially in school, at least from my recollection, we often look at accounting as being the department or finance as being the department that puts all of the books together. We're doing journal entries, we're putting our statements together. Some form of those statements get delivered to senior management and then for public companies to the street to tell everybody how we've been doing. That's a very external accounting focused kind of perspective. But internally, sometimes those statements and how our information is organized, our financial information is organized, isn't directly helpful to business decisions being made. So there's a lot of internal reporting that takes place. Management accounting comes in again, a very classic school perspective. We talk about cost accounting, how many widgets have we made, how much we spent on them. We're looking at margins, things like that. A lot of that work happens in what we call FP&A. That's the function or that's the department where a lot of this reporting comes out of. Different companies, different names. I've seen different organizations that would actually have FP&A as part of their accounting roles. So there's no real differentiation between the two.
Okay.
Here at Manulife, we have the privilege of having FP&A as a separate function. So while we're in the broader kind of finance or accounting community inside of Manulife, FP&A is a separate function, and we deliver all the information that's going to inform our CFOs and our CEOs at the different business levels, how their business has been doing. So a lot of the times we are focused on classic kind of gap measures, net income, expenses, that sort of thing. But we also get to go into non-GAAP measures. So here at Manulife, we have core earnings. That's similar to like operating income. So we're focused on income that comes from our regular course of business as opposed to unusual or inorganic kind of transactions or mergers, acquisitions, that sort of thing. We also can look into non-GAAP measures that are non-financial in nature entirely. Things like employee engagement scores. We can look into net promoter scores for our business. How are we doing on the street? There's both qualitative and quantitative measures in that aspect. Sometimes it's just a risk level, high, medium, low. Other things have been quantified to try and measure how the company is doing in different ways. All of that information comes together. FP&A is the team that delivers all of that information on a regular basis to our senior management to help and decide how we want to proceed as a company.
Okay. And you told us a little earlier before the students got in, if
Hmm.
you think about FP&A, your focus is on P. So
Yes.
give us a sense for like timelines, how far out are you planning, and how does that help make decisions?
So yeah, my focus on the FP&A part is planning. So I focus on how much money is Manulife going to make next year and into the next 4 years. We think of it as like a 5 year kind of horizon, the present year, 2024, and then I'm looking all the way out to 2028.
Okay, can I
So we've
stop you
got,
there?
yeah.
So for all of the students who have had finance profs who told you accountants look at history and finance people look at the future, it is not true.
No. Yeah, 100% that is not true, especially when it comes to FP&A. As we're talking about, it's just past September 30th. Manulife is closing on our Q3 results. Internally, there is lots and lots of accounting taking place. All the fun things that we learned about, closing entries, needing to put the statements together,
Yep.
that is all true.
Yes.
However, in my role, I do look back at a lot of history, but very much to inform what we think is going to happen in the future. I would say 90% of my role is about looking forward. Looking forward not only at what we think is going to happen numerically, but also how can we change what we think is going to happen going forward. There's a huge amount of interaction with the strategy function. So looking at the company entirely from a business strategy perspective. What are the objectives of what we want to do as a company? Never mind the numbers for a second. Just what do we want to offer to our customers? How do we want that experience to look like? What kind of products do we want to offer out there? All of those things. And then we go back into the numbers and say, okay, how can we make this happen? A lot of the time, the business decisions aren't solely driven on how much money we're going to make because some decisions need to be just based on the environment that we're in. And after that, after understanding that environment, then we go and quantify that and try to reflect that into our plan. So that's where the planning comes in. And then from there, of course, as we talked about the actuarial side of things, with insurance, a lot of the metrics that we look at in planning are also very industry specific. So we're also looking at sales, not just by number of policies that we're selling, but we also want to understand the value of those policies today versus in the future. Again, looking at obligations and how much cash flow is going to come in. So there's also very industry specific metrics that we're trying to plan for that's going to give a more complete picture of what we envision Manulife to look like in the next 5 years.
Okay, so I can see we got a bunch coming into
Hmm.
questions in chat. So Wenchen, I'll come to you in a minute. One last question just to sort of round out role for the students. Your focus is on planning. When did the transformation tag get added to the title and the
Mm.
role, and how does it play into what you do?
So it was about a year ago that I was given the opportunity to look into the transformation aspect of FP&A. The concepts of FP&A are not new. I think the idea of FP&A, even if it is not a separate department or function, exists in every single company. Sometimes it's just a little bit more high level. The CFO may be thinking about it themselves without the support of a whole team, for example. Uh, and so with that, Manulife has had FP&A for a very, very long time. And we've been planning for, well, since the start of this company, I would imagine. And the way that we were planning was very much historical driven. There was a lot of, I would say, traditional accounting focus in the way that we planned. We focused a lot on creating pro forma type information. So not just what the income statement is going to show this quarter or the at the end of this year. We kind of just extrapolated that out into the plan horizon and said, if we just roll forward with all of our assumptions, this is what we think the company is going to look like, which made a lot of sense because along the way we can interject and say, well, we can make assumptions about what changes we're going to make within the company. We can make other assumptions about new business decisions that are going to take place. But oftentimes, those views and where that information was coming from was very accounting focused, very financial reporting focused. And we found that in some cases, it wasn't informative enough for our executives to actually make decisions. They wanted to know something that was either more qualitative or something that was going to be more driven by the actual decisions, the business decisions that they want to make. Again, um, an executive doesn't wake up and say, hey, I want to make $10 million. Usually, a CEO is thinking about the actions that they want to take. Hey, I want to sell these products. Hey, I want to venture into new markets, expand our geographical footprint, something like that. Yes, there are numbers and dollars related to it, but that may only be one aspect of it. So, stepping back into the more business decisions that are not numbers driven, how can we associate those decisions with the numbers? We found that looking just at your income statement or your balance sheet was not enough. So we're going back and we're saying, how can we challenge the processes that we have and change what that looks like? This is where a lot of the management accounting or management reporting comes in, where that is the focus. We're trying to provide information that is going to allow executives to make better decisions. And along the way, we're trying to also capture the new data that we have available to us at our fingertips. So tapping into um, where technology is today, we have the ability to digest a significantly larger amount of data. We can model with a lot more capability in a lot less time. We now have AI, so we have the opportunity to use the power of computers and technology and digital transformation to help us get to those answers quicker, with less human intervention, so more accuracy, at least in the calculation. So we're trying to tap into those opportunities and make the process kind of help us get to the analysis part, the A of the FP&A, a little bit sooner so that we have more information at our fingertips that's going to be informative to the decisions that we want to make.
Cool. All right. Wenshin, over to you to pull some of these questions out of chat.
Hmm.
Yeah, since you just mentioned about AI and data analytics, I saw our students, Michael, and he asked about with the rapid advance of this AI new technology, what's the impact on the FP&A role? Like, do you want to talk more details about this, the impact of the new technology?
Yeah, AI is interesting because we think of like ChatGPT or OpenAI kind of concepts. A lot of I would say tools that allow us to kind of ask human questions, and the data gets searched in the background by the system or by the algorithm to come out with some sort of answer. Um, we're definitely interested in how that's going to change our environment. Right now, we're seeing that a lot of the existing software that we work with, so for example, the Microsoft Office suite, is incorporating that capability kind of in-house, and we're looking at opportunities to incorporate that into the way that we work on a daily basis. Simple things like help me schedule meetings with these people and make sure it fits into everybody's calendar, all the way to asking the system about our data and doing the analysis for me, or taking the recommendations on putting information going from a table and a whole set of numbers into a graph or a chart. Those are very like tangible examples of how AI is supporting us. We're also looking into data analytics. So again, insurance companies got lots and lots of data in the background at varying different levels. How can we go and digest that? How can we find the trends? How could we analyze that information a little bit quicker? Traditionally, we do a lot of comparative or trend analysis year over year, comparing to some sort of benchmark, things that we see very classically on a lot of income statements, or other financial statements. We can now do all of that information or digest all of that information very, very quickly. We can even go back and compare to much more historical information. In the past, we had to spend a lot of time to bring that information back into the current state or the present day, doing a lot of, um, let's say, FX or inflation adjustments. We may also have stored that information in different systems. So we're kind of pulling from our archives and looking in different places. Systems now can help us do all of that very, very quickly. And it'll kind of understand and try and compare all of that information quickly for us. So I think that's one of the quickest things that we've been able to see so far. It's that everything can be done faster, where we can kind of communicate to the system what we are looking for and trust that the calculation is happening kind of across the board in a very consistent manner, bringing everything to the present day.
Yeah, excellent. So, yeah, yeah. Since you talk about transformation, so I saw another
Hmm.
our students, Sarah Mia. So she talks about if you'd like to introduce a bit more about how you would communicate these changes to the team, right? So you mentioned about the executives; they're looking for actions,
Hmm.
but actions or changes mostly have a lot of resistance, right? So how would you communicate this type of changes to the team, and how does this turnaround of new practices looks like? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that goes back into a little bit of history on how the transformation roles came to be. Um, like I said, planning has been around in Manulife and in a lot of companies for a very, very long time. And as more information becomes available, or as the demand for information to help us understand how the business is doing becomes higher and higher, the systems and tools that we have in place started to kind of go obsolete. We were limited by the tools that we had implemented in the past. where there was very traditional databases that would store a certain amount of information. As we transformed as a company and changed the way that we reported, we can adapt those systems and tools to fit with that. But over time, we started to outgrow the tools that we had. So there were a lot of challenges, even for the general analysts on the team that were trying to put this information together. So, like I said in the last answer, with AI, there's a lot of things that can be helped with that. But at the very least, we still need to be able to communicate what we're looking for to AI so that it can understand what we want out of it. So along the way, we basically had a lot of analysts that would do that work without AI support before. And it was very challenging because it's very tedious, it's very data heavy, it's a lot of number crunching and a lot of detail, usually with very little time. Time was really the big challenge. And it wasn't even like, oh, I've got long hours to work because I've got so many things to do. It was that literally you would not be able to get through all of the things that you want to do in the time given, no matter if you worked 24 hours a day kind of thing. So with that, we identified that there were lots and lots of limitations to our systems and tools. And that kind of over the couple of years, especially during the pandemic, we kind of surfaced and said, hey, maybe we should change the process. Maybe we should take a step back and think about how we can change out what we're doing from the very beginning to digest this information, to change the way that we're delivering this information to better address what our executives are looking for. When we introduced the idea of transformation, we then said, hey, look, it's been a while. We've been using this existing set of tools for like the last 10 years. So, how about we look onto the market and see what new software is available, what new capabilities or new um, uh, software systems or database systems are available out there that maybe we could adopt into Manulife. Looking at that, we saw that there's been lots and lots of developments on the technical side, on the technology side, that we could adopt. And that's what we've done. We've brought in a new piece of software that helps us consolidate all the information much, much quicker. The great thing about it is that we're basically redesigning the database that we had. Now we can shed the weight of all of the legacy things that we had in the past, all 10 years of old structures and old organization of data. We can basically get rid of all of that and design it in the way that we want the information to be organized going forward.
Yeah, we have a lot of other students' questions, but before I go, I probably will let Nancy continue so we can go endless with all these questions.
Okay. I do want to pick up on one because I've seen it popping into chat as well. So thanks for the students who put this in. You're talking about that sort of connection between you want to change the process and you're kind of bound by systems,
Mhm,
so you got to change the
mhm,
system so you can change the process, which is great. And people not having a lot of time. But as
mhm.
you change both those things, process and tools, you need training. So how
Yes.
have you tried to make time for employees to get comfortable with the new process and tools? What kinds of things have you done?
So very fortunately in the process and the tools that we're transforming, and I guess the caveat is we're really trying to not change both at the same time.
Hmm.
I feel like as transformation goes, when you try to change the design of a process, excuse me, a design of a process as well as the tools that enable or implement that process, that is usually recipe for disaster. So I do not recommend that.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is, when it comes to training specifically, the advantage that we have is that we have a user base or we have a large team of FP&A people in the company that know the process. We know what we're trying to answer. We know what we're trying to report on. We know what we're trying to deliver. And we know when these things need to happen. So we're familiar with the process, which allows us to then adopt a new tool much more seamlessly. Instead of going in and saying, hey, I don't know how to use this piece of software, I don't know what anything is, we're saying, hey, I need to do this specific task. where can I find it in this piece of software? So the recognition is much higher. They're not just randomly looking at trying to learn a new piece of software from scratch without knowing what it does. There's an expectation of what this piece of software is supposed to help them do. And along the way in the transformation journey, we've brought all of our users along from the very beginning. We've been describing to them what the challenges are. So then we're echoing back the pain points that they've told us. And we said, these are the things that we're trying to fix. And also, more specifically, we've also told them these are the things that we are not yet going to fix.
Okay.
So they have a very clear expectation of what to look for in that new piece of software. We've done lots and lots of training sessions, very much like this actually, where we're talking through the process that we're trying to transform in a theoretical sense and then also from a practical sense. We're doing a lot of compare and contrast between the different tools, and we're also doing a lot of parallel runs, which means right now in this current year, throughout 2024, we've actually been running both systems at the same time. That means that it is quite a bit of work. It means that it is not less work, unfortunately, for anybody
Yeah.
because there is the need to still answer all the questions and deliver all the reporting that we need to do, but also learn the new tool. But what we're saying is that, hey, as you go through and do your job and learn what the new tool is going to offer, you should now be able to see how the new tool is going to make your life easier. And going forward, what we're hoping to do is as we improve the capabilities of our new solution, then we can gradually get off of the old solution.
Okay. So if I sort of pick up on something there, you used an interesting word, which is see.
Hmm.
And you also talked about very specific use cases, right?
Hmm.
Here's the task. Here's how we could do it using the new tool. Would some of those training sessions involve demos, that kind of thing? So people can actually, oh, okay,
Hmm.
this doesn't look as scary as I thought maybe it might be.
Yeah, and actually, now that I think about it, it's very much like courses in university. There are lectures, so we have our training sessions. Then we have additional lab hours where we go into very practical demos. And then we have office hours. I think right at the very beginning, when I first introduced the software to the broader user base, we did all three. There were weekly training sessions. There were weekly demos, and then there were daily office hours. I had 1 hour every day on a call. All the users were free to join whenever they want to, and there were just questions coming rapid fire towards us. It could be any sort of questions like, hey, how's the project doing? All the way to, I'm trying to do a very specific task. Where do I go? So we were very, very connected to our user base to make sure that everybody felt like they had all the resources to learn how to do the new piece of software. And the interesting thing is, there were sometimes very process-oriented questions as well. There were questions not just about the transformation aspect of it, but just going back into the process, which allowed for everybody involved, everyone in the function, to start to think about, hey, how can I change the way that I'm doing my job that's going to maximize on the potential of this new tool that we're implementing? And how can I make that a reality? How can I change what I'm doing so that it's better, more efficient, going to be less tedious?
Cool. All right. Well, I have a couple of wrap-up questions, but Wenshin, I'll turn
Mhm.
it back to you because I know we got lots of questions in chat, so I'll let you pull another couple out for Wincy.
Yeah, I saw students have actually very curious about AI, like with regard to this new technology, right? So I'm not sure some of this concern comes from maybe AI is replacing most of these mundane tasks, right? So you're talking about way faster calculations, saving
Mhm.
people's time more efficient. Do you see those changes more from an initial, let's say, streamlining the process, or do you see this impact more on the higher level, let's say strategic level, improve the decision-making capabilities?
For the time being, in my exposure, and very specific to my role at Manulife, which is a very, very small scope, so not representative of the industry or just kind of workplaces in general. But so far, we've seen a lot of that AI benefit kind of on the calculation and data processing level. So, yes, a lot of the mundane and tedious tasks that we would have had to do manually that would take hours and hours, a lot of those are going away because software is a lot more advanced and able to digest some some of those calculations a lot quicker. Things are coming out of the box with the capability to do a lot of this kind of accounting analysis, if you will, which is very helpful to us. That frees up a lot of our analysts' time to actually go and look at what those results are saying to us and doing calculations that are not out of the box. Once you get the kind of generic analysis out of the way, then it becomes the questions of, well, how does business transform that? We actually have a lot of things that are manually done still and manually calculated because in reality, nothing is a regular trend. There's always an exception, and it's not just one exception. Usually, we're hit with a handful of exceptions that we need to incorporate into our calculations at different times. There's a lot of scenario modeling that takes place, but unfortunately, unlike in the actuarial world where we have very large models that are meant for scenario analysis, on the FP&A side, oftentimes we're thinking about it from a more business perspective. It's a much smaller scope. And it's a lot of playing around with the numbers to see if they're going to fit in with what we're looking for. So a lot of that is still kind of done, I would say, from a manual perspective on the fly, but the base on which we're doing those calculations is now much more automated. We can get to that point where we can what we call play around with the numbers and make different scenarios much, much faster.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's very insightful, right? So, I see some other questions with regard to how you see, let's say, the coordination between different departments when you're talking about FMP
Mm.
and transformation. How do you, let's say, collaborate, let's say, IT, HR, or operations departments?
Yeah, I think traditionally when we think of like IT and operations, we're thinking of people that are in the businesses. When I think of IT, I'm thinking of everything from the department that buys the computer that I do my work on, all the way to the team that's going to help me implement this new piece of software to help me transform. So what we have in between there is actually kind of a finance IT hybrid team. So again, accounting roles that don't have anything to do with accounting. Um, technical experts that are going to be in-house to help us implement software that's very finance specific or accounting specific. So the tools that we're using right now or the software that we're using right now is managed specifically by a team of developers that are I would say, have a mix of accounting background as well as business background. And they're working solely with us to implement the software for FP&A. A similar kind of team takes place for maintaining our ledger system, maintaining other databases and other tools that are used across the company to get to our numbers.
Yeah, and actually, students are curious about any type you want to share any type of like memorable projects or any type of challenges you have tackled. I see many students raise a similar question to that. You'd like to share any of your experience with a particular project.
Mm, I think this project so far is definitely the most memorable, definitely top of mind. So for perspective, new piece of software brought in specifically for FP&A. We're looking at our planning and our forecasting process. So again, very forward-looking type information, and transforming that from our existing database that's been around for about 10 years. Um, I would say 6 months ago, we had nothing. We had just signed the contract with the software company so that we could have licenses to implement the piece of software, but there was no implementation at all. So within the last couple of months, we've gone from something very theoretical, from something that was just on paper, a general process that we had laid out and said, hey, we want to move this process from whatever tools and systems we have into this new piece of software. I think the learning curve was very, very steep for me. We're very familiar, I would say, generally with the idea that going into a company, there's already software that's in place. Someone's training us as new analysts to use the existing accounting system or use a piece of software to get data. Or if you press this button over here, then your report comes out. It's a very different perspective when we're implementing a piece of software for the very, very first time. There was a lot of going back into the back end and understanding what does it mean to establish a database? what are the things that I need to design? What are the things that I need to consider when it comes to security access, or how do the actual pages come together? It was actually quite reminiscent of the CATS class, I think it is. Computer assisted audit techniques. I don't know what the new term for that class is.
Nor do I, but keep going.
Yeah, it was definitely also very reminiscent of some of the classes I remember taking about Tableau. So designing dashboards where, again, that data is already sort of organized. I only need to take that data from different tables, create the relationships, and create the bar graph. But behind that, where does the data come from? How did we know that that table was organized that way? It takes a very interesting combination of um, accounting knowledge and business knowledge to be able to interpret that information, and also technical, like completely IT based knowledge to understand how that database is going to come together and understand the tables. So I really enjoyed that learning opportunity there, and being able to understand, like, okay, how did this piece of software ever get into our company, and what does it mean to actually implement something brand new for the very first time?
Very cool. You start with this vague vision of something
Yeah.
and you turn it into something that works.
Hmm.
Wenshin, I'll give you one last call, one last question you want to throw in from the students?
Uh, oh, all right. So I saw students actually are very interested in going back to the very beginning, the rotational program. So
Hmm.
let's say for our students that's interested in joining that rotation program, do you think what's the, let's say, the qualifications and any of your advice with regard to if they want to join that program, what type of skills or
Hmm.
experiences they need to get to get into that program?
Yeah, so the rotational programs, I can't speak for all of them across all the different 50 companies, but at Manulife, it is a graduate program, which means we're looking for you to have completed your undergraduate degree. And typically, the rotational programs are CPA, um, follow the CPA path to all of the experience requirements. So all of the prerequisites that are associated with becoming a CPA student are needed as well. Otherwise, I would say it's very much like any other full-time job application. We're looking for students in good standing, know what they're looking for in terms of their career, um, uh, strong communication skills, transferable skills. Um, of course, coming through SAF, you would have had your co-op experience as well, so we'll definitely be looking for diverse experiences there. And from there, really, I don't think there's anything that's particularly unique about applying to rotational programs. And I think the last thing that I would offer there is to make sure you fill in all of the application requirements. That's usually one of the things that are somewhat unique, because we know that there are many, many, many candidates out there that are looking to join our programs. So usually there's some sort of supplementary question or add on to the application, or a requirement for a cover letter, something like that. So really it's following the instructions and making sure that your application is complete. From there, it's very, very similar to any other application.
Mhm. Yeah, I believe that's very helpful to students. Yeah. They ask you whether you have any, like, say, financial analysis experience, audit experience. I guess you directly go to Manulife, right? So, uh,
Mhm.
Yeah,
yeah.
so I see the question too. Would co-op experience where they did financial analysis or they did some audit, would those kinds of things be viewed as positive when they apply?
I think relevant accounting experience is always regarded positively. It's an indication that there's some business acumen, or at least vocab that is probably transferably useful to training up someone that's newly hired to the company. I think that applies everywhere. So certainly co-op experience is going to be valuable for that. When it comes to going into FP&A and looking at things that are, say, non-traditional roles for accounting. Um, I think traditional accounting experience is actually quite valuable anyways, especially if it's going to be a rotational program. I think at the very end of the day, you're still going to need to complete all your competencies. So that's always going to be valuable. There isn't something that stands out to me as, oh, this is particularly value add. I would say it's very general. Having the experience and being able to recognize how the things that you learned from your co-op experience can be transferred to other roles is probably the biggest learning.
Okay. Thanks for the advice about the rotational programs. Let
Mhm.
me wrap it up with sort of a broad question in the general area. We got a lot of fourth year students on the call today. Some of them will be doing
Mhm.
MAcc, some probably not. Um, what's your advice to the students as they look forward over the next 4 to 5 years? What would you advise them?
Do you mean 4 to 5 years within Waterloo or
No, no,
beyond
after
Waterloo?
Waterloo. After Waterloo.
Ah, I see. Okay.
What kind of
Enjoy it.
advice? Okay.
Enjoy. I think enjoyment is definitely the big one for me. I know that the first 4 to 5 years, especially coming from SAF, it means you're probably still studying or probably still challenging exams or still working on your competencies, which means more report writing, lots and lots of learning. Enjoy all of it, but also enjoy everything beyond that. I know that studying is a big part of university life for many of us, and exams are also kind of always around the corner, whether it's a midterm or a final. So for sure, it's enjoy those first couple of years. It's a great opportunity to learn everything beyond the classroom. And also about yourself, I think. So that's the important thing to do.
Well, and one of the things I've certainly heard you talk about today is you've learned a lot over the last 10
Yes.
years. So, um, good advice to everyone. Thank you, Wincy, for making time for us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank
Thank
you
you
to the
so much.
students.
Yeah. Thanks for
Thanks,
having me.
Wenchen.
Yeah, I think students probably definitely get a lot of advice from you, especially they're graduating, entering their career. Yeah.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day, everyone, as you head off, and have a great long weekend. And Wency, let's try not make it another 10 years before I see you
Sounds
live and in
good.
person.
That sounds good. Thank
If
you.
you do have an excuse to come out to head office, let us know and we'll buy you a coffee.
Yeah, we should connect for sure.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Lindsay.